Hi, my name is Julia Lewis, and I'm going to be the summarizer for Team 3. So today we're talking about riots. Riots are defined as a group of people who feel strongly about an injustice that get together in public place to show their disdain. It has to involve violence. So riots and protests get confused a lot of times because protests are peaceful and riots are not, but they are both a group of people coming together and showing their disdain. So, a lot of famous riots recently are the Breonna Taylor protests, which a lot of them turned violent. George Floyd protests, which also turned violent. Capitol Hill Anonymous Zone, which one or two turned violent, but a lot of those were just protests. And the Kanosh unrest and shooting in August 23rd. So, how riots affect people? Riots, like I said, involve violence. Violence can lead to destruction of property, companies. It also leads to looting, and a lot of this affects the economy because if a building's torn down because of a riot or burned down or however they do it, you have to pay to get it back up in some way. That's also a business that is not able to function. And so that really affects the economy and the money just coming in and going out of the government. And then, like I said, violence just in general is going to affect people because there are a lot of people being put in hospital and are severely injured and sometimes even killed, which is really unfortunate. But because riots are violent, it just ends up hurting people. So it can also lead to inequalities because people assume one group of individuals are violent. So they just assume that because they weren't in the riot, they don't know what happened. Because a lot of times, peaceful protests turn into riots. So it can lead to stereotyping of a specific group of people. It can lead to people just assuming all protests are bad and things like that. So it can lead to prejudice from a lot of people. So here's another riots are good or bad. Some cons are they're not peaceful. A lot of times misuse of protest turns into riots. It can lead to injuries like I was talking about. It can end up making the problem worse. Now what I mean by this is that you're rioting of an issue that you don't agree with what's happening or to get something better. A lot of times, violence will just make the person that you're trying to convince, which is usually the government. So in this scenario, the government would just turn a blind eye. We'll be like, oh, well, they chose to be violent, so we're not going to do this, even if they might have considered it beforehand. Many times, governments just ignore them. Like I said, they just turn a blind eye, and they don't even consider it because of the actions that were taken. They're costly. Protests are very costly, and like I said, protest leads to riots most of the time. Not only that, the damages to companies, the damages to people are costly and bad. So social prejudice, like I was saying, a lot of people will just automatically assume that it was this one specific group of people that installed the riot, and just makes a lot of times the issue that we're fighting for worse. It causes damages to people, to emotions, to buildings, everything like that. And it can lead to a divided community. It can pit two groups of people against each other, and that's never a good thing because that leads to more protests. Now, some pros are that people can express themselves because all in all, riots are people trying to express themselves. It can lower social tensions, which means the people who are angry got to express themselves. They got to feel like they're making a change, which is my next point. And that'll just lead to people overall feeling better. Making a change, just feeling like you're doing your part in your community and that this specific thing that you're talking about is getting fixed, it's getting mended, you're doing your part. You can find other like-minded people. Again, a riot's about what you believe. It's something that you feel very strongly about, strong enough to resort to violence. So other like-minded people are gonna be there. People who believe the same thing you do. It raises awareness about the problems that you're facing and everything like that. It releases stress. So again, a lot of the stress and anxiety you have from not being able to have your voice heard, to have that way to speak out and make a change, is very stressful and very scary, and it's definitely a way to release that. It's a feeling of community. All in all, you find like-minded people, you find a group of people that you fit in with this belief, and it's a good way to find friends, which sounds very weird. It's a unique way to find friends. And then a lot of times, it's over human rights. It's over just things that you believe so strongly and that you'll fight, and 9 times out of 10, that's what you believe is happening to people that shouldn't be. So why people riot? It's to express themselves. Again, I can't stress enough, riots are about something that you're mad at or you want changed. To spark change, again, you want it changed. To grow closer to people. Now, I know this may seem like a weird answer to why people riot. However, when you think about it, like with the Black Lives Matter movement, there were a lot of allies who believed very strongly, but they also wanted to show their support and their alliance with the Black Lives Matter movement. And then they just grow angry at situations. They're tired of the government doing this, this, and this, and so they riot, and they tell them, this is what I want fixed. So what the news says about riots. The New York Times said that they seemed like cavemen after the Trump riots. They are described as crazy in an article by ABC. It's NBC. The Washington Post says that theirs showed no restraint. A lot of times in the news, riots are seen as horrible. They're seen as just people who don't quite know how to express themselves. And like I said, they're cavemen. They get angry because their voices aren't being heard, and they resort to violence. Here's a list of riots in other countries. There are anti-Taliban protests, electoral protests, commander sword protest, truck bombing protest, police violence protest. So a lot of this isn't what we're dealing with. Obviously, we don't have to deal with the Taliban or commander sword or truck bombing usually. But police violence and electoral protests are absolutely everywhere. And it is really bad. This is a picture of a riot at the anti-Taliban protest. And it was not good. So protests, like I was saying, are peaceful. They stand up for a change. And it's a riot, but it's not violent. That's the key thing. Protests, peaceful, riots, violent. So my rebuttal is that riots are a natural expression of anger and frustration. Overall, people who riot are protesters, and 9 times out of 10, they don't set out to be violent. They're not, oh, I'm gonna go burn down the Capitol because I'm so angry. 9 times out of 10, it happens because they're not being heard, because the government isn't listening to them. So that's actually my next point. The government doesn't listen to peace. They don't listen until it turns violent. It's not oh, they want this and they're being nice, so I'm going to do this. But a lot of times they use that as an excuse, the violence as an excuse to not do what we're asking. It's sometimes the only way to make a change. It's the only way to be heard. And that's really the main thing why people riot, is because they want to be heard. They want to make a change and affect society so bad because they see that it's wrong. And so they're trying so desperately to make a change, and they get frustrated, and it's like a toddler. You throw things, you get angry, you throw a temper tantrum, and this is what happens. So my audience questions for you is, what is the difference between a riot and a protest? And why do people riot other than for change? And that's all I have for you today. Thank you.